Hi, everybody. Welcome to this podcast where I will be going into shelf creation, quick selection sets, and rig orientation. So, of course, we do have this brand new snazzy character that we'll be using for the next 2 weeks. But I figured before you just dive right into this week's project and next week's, really, it's good to build a bit of a workflow when it comes to more complex characters. So up to now, you've been using rigs that basically have like 1 or 3 controls on them. Here we have upwards of like 15, maybe 20. And when you're dealing with a full character rig, you're going to be dealing with this many curves, if not more, as far as organization is concerned. So you really want to stay organized in this process as you're moving forward. So here are just a few things to get acclimated to before you start animating any rig, not even just this particular rig. This is to carry over into any other class you have or any other rig that you may use from here on. You may want to use these sorts of tools. So the first thing is when you are going to pose this character, you want to use what's known as a quick selection set. Now, if in the earlier podcast you followed along and you created your own shelf, you can, again, go ahead and do that by going to this little cog up here and hitting New Shelf. And then it'll ask you to name it. And once you do, I named mine Sauce. Here's another one called Awesome. I don't know. Sometimes I'll have buttons and I'll just name them and it'll be like 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, or something. So what I'm going to show you here is how to create a quick selection set. So when you have all these different curves, you really want to make one button, one Mel button or Python button that sits up here that you can just click and it will basically grab every single curve on the character. So what you want to do is deselect the geometry mask so you can't grab the character geometry or anything like that. All you can grab are these little individual curves. So what we're going to do is grab the whole character, and then you can actually go to Create, and then way down here is Sets, Quick Select Set. Once you go ahead and hit that, it'll prompt you to name it. You don't want to do that, of course. I mean, maybe you do, I don't know. But you can call it All for the All selection. Then go Add to Shelf. And now you have this button that when you hit it, boom, you create a full selection of the character. Now, why do you think this is important? Well, basically, if you come up with a pose on the character on, let's say, like frame 8, and you go ahead and key that, now what happens if I go to 18 and I have a completely different pose and I didn't grab some of the controls that may have changed? If you don't have the whole character selected from one key to another key, you're not in control of what happens in between. So this will be made more visible to you as you really get into full character animation in some of the later podcasts. But basically, you want to make sure that this is one of the more important tenets of organization as you're working forward. So definitely go ahead and make that button. You will be using that often. You might even be making some extra buttons later on that will be pretty important. Sometimes I like to make buttons that are like just for the back, where you can grab all 3 back controls. And perhaps this is a good opportunity to go into rig orientation here. So, of course, these are the back controls. A few things on these. These are rotation-based. They're not translation or scale-based. So, as you might guess, you can grab all of them, and you get some pretty nice bend to the back there. As you might guess, there's some pretty decent plyometrics, I guess, that you can do. What you don't want to do, this is a common pitfall that people will do in the back. They'll go, okay, I'm going to grab the top control, and I'm just going to rotate that. And the thing is, this doesn't really work out too well if you're only grabbing one of the back controls, because we have a rib cage and our backs generally don't just rotate from the top. We actually do have a nice fall off from our top down. So if you grab all 3, you're going to get a much more organic feel to your back. So please remember to do that if you are using a character, not even just this character. Again, these are things that you want to carry forward throughout anything that you're doing. So here we have an inverse kinematic arm. This is IK. Also, the legs are IK as well. What that basically means as compared to FK, and you'll be learning this in your rigging class down the road. But basically, all you need to know is IK is basically the way the joint chain works. It actually goes inverse. So it's actually from the hand back to the character rather than the character out toward the hand. That's how the joint chain is interpolated. So you can actually say, I want the hand to be exactly like right here. And if you did IK, you would have to say, okay, I want the shoulder to rotate here, then I want the elbow to rotate here, then I want the wrist to rotate here, or something. And then you'd actually, have to go down the chain that way. So this kind of goes backwards. So when it comes to that, the hand, as you can see, is translation and rotation based. So you have the wrist there. Now, this kind of poses an important point. Once you have posed the hand the way you like it, you might ask yourself, well, how am I going to affect the elbow? What you have is this thing called a pole vector, which sounds super cool, but really all it is the elbow. So wherever this is in space, that's where the elbow is going to point. So it's a vector basically, as in the elbow is a vector right out to this object. So use that to help guide your poses to make them as dynamic as possible. So this is also important for the knees. The knees have their own pole vectors as well. You can see how that's kind of rotating. And I'll show you real quick here. This is your center of gravity, your hips. Some people call this the root. And this is what you'll be using to basically have your character dance. Something like that. This is your translation. There is also a independent hip control. This is rotation based, so you'll actually be able to get your samba looking thing or something. I don't know. So there's that. Of course, your shoulders. Please don't forget these. These are often forgotten. Shoulders are hugely important if you want expressive poses. So, build that into your poses when you're animating. The other control, basically the neck and the head. Now, why are these slightly different? Well, in some characters, depending on the pose you're trying to go for, maybe you have one of these characters whose neck is down that way, and then their head is like this. So they look like they have a headache or something. They're like, kind of wincing. You can get that sort of effect. So, just one last little thing here. Actually, two small things. If you remember the star in last week's project, you might be familiar with these little extra controls. And you might also remember that to modify even the bricks, let's say, in the Super Smash Ball, you just grab that by left-clicking the word, and then you can middle mouse drag left and right, and it gives you pretty nice control of the feet here. So if you want toe pivot, of course, there it is there. So all in that rig. Some other stuff, real quick before I end this, is the fingers. These are often forgotten as well. For some reason, people don't like to pose the hand out. But basically, these are rotation based. So go ahead and just grab the whole chain if you want just a real quick pose. And of course, there's this nice block as well, which basically allows you to bend the whole hand, basically the palm area. So that is it. That's the once over on the whole rig. That should warm you up for the next podcast and the podcasts to come. Again, whenever you're keying your stuff, just go ahead and hit your all button, and then go ahead and hit the S key wherever you want to have that pose set, basically. So all this is going to be animating forward will be, you'll go to a frame that you want to have a particular pose. You'll go ahead and pose your character out. Then you'll hit this button. Then you'll hit the S key, boom, and that will register every single location on every single channel on every single control that you have selected. So it's basically saying, I want Maya to have the character look exactly like this on this frame. So we'll get into later on how to get from one pose to the next in an interesting way. So look forward to that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.